everyone, Teresa here again, Teemac for short, you already know. So for game 2, it's BAL City Basketball Club of Tanzania and Johannesburg Giants of South Africa. This is the debut season for these two teams, their first time in the BAL, and it was an interesting game. Now, during the road to the BAL, BAL City Basketball had lost the game to Johannesburg in their run for the BAL. But surprisingly, they beat Johannesburg this time in the Kalahari Conference in their first game today. So, how did that happen? BAL City Basketball played a strong-paced game and they were shooting from the threes, just like we saw in the first game. They came in hot, the players were in sync, those screens up top and then the punch drive and kick out to the open man outside. Zuzua was just having a field day on the 3-point, and David Michino as well in the first 3 quarters of that game was amazing for BAL City Basketball. Guards kept taking the ball to the post players inside the paint. They kept attacking, initiating those moves and causing havoc in the paint for the post players of Johannesburg team. It was a beautiful game to watch, and honestly I would say this was an easy matchup for BAL City Basketball. We'll see what they do subsequently as the games progress. Now for the Johannesburg Giants, they started slow. Their pacing was slow. They weren't scoring. They weren't attacking. In fact, in the first quarter of that game, they had 2 points for like the longest stretch of time, almost 6 minutes, before they were able to knock down a 3 points and made it to 5 points. First quarter ended on a really, really low score, 12 points for Johannesburg. And that was, one of the lowest that we've seen in the BAL games. But then in the first half, Terrell Hedy was, he was active, he was efficient, he was effective for their team. He had about 18 points in the first half of that game. There was a point in the game where they had to step up their defense a little bit, force a turnover, shot clock violation. I think that was the only shot clock violation that BAL City had in that game. And then it picked up a little bit for them, but then they went back down, not being able to score on the offense and then not being able to stop BAL City from scoring on their own offense. Something interesting that you need to know is that the president of the Tanzanian Basketball Federation, Hashim Thabit, a former NBA player, is on the BAL City team, and he was really impactful in that game. In the first half of the game, it was a battle between himself and Craig, the biggest guy in the BAL, and it was just a beautiful, thing for me personally to see that we have an active president, of a federation who is still playing and, still working on the development of, his country's basketball. That was an interesting part of BAL City team that I wanted to point out. So let's look at the stats. How did both teams play? And how did it reflect on their statistics? It was on the offense that BAL City Basketball took charge of the game. They were more efficient, they were more effective, they were more confident in how they approached their offense. You could tell from the stats on their assists, they had 16 assists to Johannesburg's 13 assists. They had more steals, 10 steals to Johannesburg's 5 steals. And points from turnovers, they had more, 21 to Johannesburg's 14. And then, of course, second chance points, they had 6 to Johannesburg's 3. Now, defensively, they were also very active. They forced a lot of turnovers for Johannesburg. Johannesburg had 22 turnovers, but BAL City also had quite a few with 14 turnovers. On the fast break points, Johannesburg had it more. They had 14 and BAL City had just 13. And also on the bench points, Johannesburg Giants had 24 bench points, which means they have pretty good bench, pretty good players on the bench that can come in and, be effective. And BAL City only had 15. On the rebound as well, Johannesburg had 40 rebounds compared to BAL City's 34 rebounds. But of course, on the field goal percentage, that was where it showed the prowess of BAL City Basketball offensively. They had 55%, as field goal percentage, making 37 out of 67 attempts at the basket. Johannesburg Giants only had 28 points out of the 64 attempts that they had at the rim, which left them at 43% field goal percentage. But overall, it was a beautiful game for both teams, new in the BAL. It was an interesting game. You know, it kept going up and down for Johannesburg Giants, and it was just a steady flow, you know, all through for Dar City Basketball. And we know the game ended 100 points for Dar City Basketball and 70 points for Johannesburg Giants. Before we leave, here are the standout players. Zuzua Nisre had 35 points for Dar City Basketball. He had a field day. He was just having fun, smiling all through that game. Jacoby Terrell Heddy had 26 points. He came through for them. He tried to do, you know, everything that he could to keep his team in that game, but it wasn't enough. Michael Foster had the highest rebounds, 7. And Sibanyoni also had 7 rebounds for Johannesburg Giants. And then for assists, the French player David Benoit Michinu had 9 assists, while Sibanyoni of the Johannesburg Giants had just 3 assists, but is the highest for his team. So there you go with the top performance for this game. So that is it for the second game of the BAL. I will see you in my next video where we talk about other games and other players as the games unfold. So until my next video, Teemac out.